In a way, I'm kind of an electrician, I guess, because I focus on rewiring all the time.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 121 of the Strokecast. High-intensity gait training is a new approach to post-stroke physical therapy, or PT. See, rather than focusing on just the fine details of walking, where you exactly place your foot, how you bend your ankle, how you manage your knee, etc., it's just more focused on the volume of walking. But not only getting in those steps, but also getting the heart rate up, trying to get your heart rate to between 65 and 85% of its maximum. And the thing is, the research is showing that this approach helps the brain rewire faster, and people end up walking farther, faster, and sooner than they do with traditional PT. Neurophysical therapist Dr. Meghan Larson specializes in this therapy. And she joins us today to tell us more about just what it is, how it works, and why it is both safe and effective. Of course, this is also a special episode for me because Meghan is also the woman who taught me how to walk at age 46. She was my PT after my stroke when I did inpatient rehab at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle, and she is just generally overall awesome. So now, let's meet Meghan. So Meghan, thanks for joining us on the show this week. I'm thrilled to get to talk to you again when I'm not doing it from a wheelchair.
I know, it's so exciting. Sorry it's taken me this long, but 2 kids since you were in my care has taken up a lot of my time.
Yeah, things have been a little busy and a little hectic.
Also, my son's first year of life, I got my board certification in neurological clinical specialty. So, I was, just sitting around, not doing much.
Exactly. Well, congratulations on that. That is awesome.
Thank you.
I remember in our various conversations, your commitment to education and to advances in the field was always something I absolutely appreciated. I learned so much at that time. I remember just spending a lot of time, those various breaks after taking 3 steps and then having to sit down in the wheelchair in the parallel bars again.
Yeah.
Of just asking as many questions as I could. I absolutely appreciated the additional education I got about just what the heck was going on.
Yeah, I really think education is just as important in part of my job as teaching people to walk again, getting them moving. Because if you don't understand what's going on, I can't effectively really work with you all that well either, because you may not understand why I'm asking you to do a certain thing, or it just doesn't seem like a reasonable request. So the more I can provide that education and that understanding, not only to motivate somebody, but to really have them take ownership of their situation and of their recovery and their rehab, I'm all about it. I always tell patients there's no such thing as too many questions with me. The only thing is, if it starts to get too long in the talking part, I might say, hey, pause 1 second, let's keep moving, and then we'll come back.
Let's do a West Wing thing here and talk while you walk.
Exactly.
So as we're talking about all this education then and your continuing education since then, you have just now gotten really into this new protocol of high-intensity gait training. So what is high-intensity gait training?
So yes, it's this whole new thing that just recently came out. It started being studied in about 2011 from George Hornby, and him and his colleagues originally at Shirley Ryan in an Institute, which is in Chicago, and now he's at the University of Ohio, have really looked into this idea of intensity and what intensity means. So with neuroplasticity, we've known for a really long time, or just any sort of learning activity, that intensity matters, frequency matters. Like I know in previous podcasts, you've talked about outliers, like the book, and it's used in a lot of different things. But we've learned for a long time that increased frequency, increased intensity is really how anybody learns. So going on to what that means for stroke recovery, most patients, 80% of stroke victims will walk within the first year. But what does that walking look like? And most people, their big goal when they come in to rehab is to walk again. Even if they are walking a little bit, their walking is typically not their same walking, or people aren't walking at all. So how do we get them to meet their goal, knowing that intensity and frequency really matter? So that was like the core question that was asked starting in 2011. And in 2016, they did this huge study where they looked at what intensity actually is in terms of walking. So intensity, not only they found is how many steps you take, which is incredibly important because that's that frequency part. But they also saw that heart rate is also very important, so that we're looking actually for a cardiovascular response. People going into 65 to 85% of their heart rate max to also increase that intensity. And they did a big study in 2016 called the VIEW study, which stands for Variable Intensive Early Walking Post-Stroke. And they took two different groups. One group was these people who are going to participate in high intensity gait training, which high intensity gait training specifically is focusing your therapy sessions on walking at a high intensity. So at that high heart rate, as well as taking as many steps as you possibly can within the session. They found that these patients, compared to traditional therapy, got significantly better at walking. And how we measure how people get better at walking is either when they're better at it, they walk faster and they walk farther. And these patients were significantly better at those two things compared to the patients who received traditional therapy, which the traditional therapy was walking, balance exercise, strengthening exercises, practicing transfers, all of the things that we are still helping the patients. Everyone got better. But the people who focused on the high intensity gait training got so much better at walking in general. But the big important thing was they also got equally as better at balance and strength as the patients who participated in the traditional therapy, who actually worked on balance and strengthening activities. So you're not missing anything by focusing just on walking. If anything, you're giving them equal benefit in all areas, but exceeding that benefit in walking itself.
Interesting. So do they have a theory on why the high intensity gait training also benefited the balance and transfers and those other things?
Yes, it's what actually high intensity gait training is. So it's not just sticking someone on a treadmill and a harness and just moving their legs and telling them to go. It's actually a variable difference of stepping strategies. So the idea is that not only are you doing treadmill training, you're walking over ground, you're sidestepping, you're backward stepping, you're going upstairs, you're stepping over objects, doing obstacle courses, like even more, adding weight to the patient. You're trying to find their areas of their gait that they have the most difficulty. And they made it much easier on physical therapists, really only breaking it down to 4 parts of gait compared to like a bajillion parts of gait what you learn in school. And then this training that I took really broke down how to help people through those parts of gait, and that weren't originally challenging people enough, so that increasing that challenge allows that balance and that strength to get better. And that we are doing balance and strength training, but in terms of doing it with this walking protocol.
And that makes sense in what I do in my work as a focus on a corporate trainer, is that one of the things I keep trying to share with my stakeholders is that less is more. We're not going to get people better educated by teaching them 15 different things. We're going to get them better educated by teaching them 4 things or 3 things really well. They'll overall retain more stuff. And it sounds like that's kind of what's happening with this as well. If you can just focus on maybe those 4 key aspects of gait, you're getting more results than you would adding up everything else together.
Yeah, a lot of originally what we thought was we really wanted to normalize people's gait as much as possible. This idea that when you're talking about neuroplasticity and you want to practice perfect, and we're actually finding that's not the case. that's too much to focus on. Instead, we just want the people to walk, because when they go home, do they care that they have perfect heel strike and like accepting their weight in this perfect manner? No, they care that they can walk. So why not focus on just getting them walking? And all of those other things, those small, intricate things, get better as the patient gets stronger and walks more. So that focus on tiny little details or too many little details really just isn't super helpful. And breaking it down and making it smaller and making it focused is a great idea.
So one of the things that's sort of at the core of this, though, is, of course, getting that heart rate up. Now, when we're in the hospital, obviously, it's because something in our circulatory system has already failed and tried to kill us. So, I mean, in that acute stroke context, how do you sort of balance the need to, maybe you're still assessing for PFOs and AFib and other heart issues, hypertension, and as well as the other things, whether that's going to be diabetes, somebody who's now not smoking for the past several days or week for the first time in decades, or is still filled with cholesterol. How are you making the decision about the safe heart rate and balancing that against those other needs that may have caused the stroke in the first place?
That's a great question. And honestly, the biggest pushback from physicians and from other therapists in general was coming out with these guidelines and being like, what the heck? Isn't that going to put people at risk? And they've never had an adverse effect through this training. The people who've been running all these programs, no one has had an adverse effect. No heart attacks, no increased strokes, nothing. Nobody has had any adverse effects, which is kind of insane when you think about it. It is safe. And how you make this safe is you monitor the patient. So you're not doing this when somebody is on the acute care floor. That's not appropriate because maybe they're not medically stable. They do need to be medically stable and on a rehab unit to really start this process. So the doctors are a part of this. And then my also job in implementing this is to take vitals constantly. I'm constantly checking people's heart rates. I'm constantly checking people's blood pressures. If it starts to spike, obviously we're slowing down. But also I give people control over it as well. So mostly when I'm talking to somebody working through this, I talk to them about how hard they feel their heart and lungs are working. So not only am I getting quantitative data with using heart rate and blood pressure, but then we use something called the Rating of Perceived Exertion Scale, the BORG scale. And this is a scale from 6 to 20, which sounds ridiculous, but it's related to heart rate. So the idea that 6 is...
But regardless of how you object to it, resistance is still futile.
Yes, exactly. So 6 is supposed to be like 60 beats per minute, like resting heart rate, and 20 is supposed to be like 200 beats per minute, like max heart rate. So you tell the patient, like, I want you to give me a number of how hard this feels to your heart and lungs between 6 and 20. 6 is rest, like you're laying in bed and doing nothing and chilling. And 20 is the hardest thing you've ever done. And then some, you're about to pass out on me. How hard do you feel like you're working? And ideally, with this high intensity gait training, I'm looking to get people to between 15 and 17. And when they start hitting 17, for me personally, I feel like it's time for them to take a break. So that way, they also feel like they have control over what's going on too. They can tell me how they're feeling. And if they're getting above that, it's absolutely time to slow down, take a break, all of that, and then start up again when you feel ready. And I have had some people who've had some low blood pressures with this or high blood pressures, and then we just stop. So that's the thing, is I'm not pushing people past where their body and their safety tells me that they can go.
So it's not like when you're out there shoveling snow on your own and exerting yourself. This is an environment where somebody is very carefully monitoring you the whole time.
Yes, that's why this is still a skilled intervention. I'm not just throwing people on a treadmill saying, go! It's monitoring how their body is reacting, monitoring how their vitals are reacting, how they feel, how they're moving, all of that stuff too.
How, in your experience, how closely do people's perception of their exertion and the number they give there align with what you're actually seeing from their heart rate, their blood pressure, et cetera? In other words, how accurate is people's perception of how hard they're working versus the data that comes out of the cardiovascular monitor?
I feel like patients who really buy into this and understand and what we're looking for, it's pretty accurate, honestly. That it's maybe not like if you're telling me 13, your heart rate's 130, but like it's that same percentage that we're looking for. If they tell me they're working around a 15, they're going to probably have their heart rate between that 65 and 85% heart rate max, honestly. It's been pretty normal for the people who really, truly buy in. With anything, there are people who perceive their abilities as different, and sometimes maybe they're just not willing to put in that effort. And then it comes to me also to explaining what we're looking for. And I also think people think that I'm talking about how hard the task is and not how hard they're working, because clearly all these tasks are very hard. And as I told you multiple times in therapy, as you get better, things get harder. Therapy never gets easy. Because if it's getting harder, that means you're getting better.
Yeah, there was no reason to just practice standing up from the wheelchair every day for 3.5 weeks.
No.
For the whole session.
No, it's not going to get you better. So yeah, I also say that PTs truly innately are lazy people, that we really don't want to do anything for you. So the more that you can do, we're like, hey, that's what we're looking for.
There we go. So, I mean, given that we're working people really hard, given the challenges that we already see with neurofatigue later in the process and especially early on, how do you balance the effort people are putting in high intensity gait training with also the need for them to be able to then later in the day go to their speech therapy or their occupational therapy and still have the energy to get through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I'm still transitioning my practice, I will fully admit, to doing high intensity gait training. And my current goal is to spend at least 50 to 75% of the time working on gait and trying this high intensity training. That doesn't mean that people don't get rest breaks during my session. Absolutely not. And if I'm going to do this, the high intensity, I do try to make sure that they have a longer rest break until they have another therapy. So that way we can manage that fatigue more, all of that. Fatigue is such a huge issue with all of that because it doesn't help if you're so just darn tired from working with me that you can't do anything else. But the thing is people, while they get fatigued, they also have a great ability to kind of regenerate at the same time. Like, that's why you do get those rest breaks in therapy. That's why that's so important. I have yet to have anybody not be able to participate in their other sessions in the day. Have they had a little more difficulty sometimes when I've maybe just done a little too much? Yes. But that means then we're just giving them more rest breaks in their sessions. And that's where I work with my OT partner and my speech partner about how did they do later in the day? Were they able to like really fully participate? And then maybe if they were like just a little not so awesome, then maybe we'll back off and not do that extra little set at the end or something like that. Or maybe they're not quite ready to move into working on weighted walking or anything like that yet. So it's a give and take like anything.
So you're not actually at the point yet where you've got Emily calling out down the hall, "What the heck did you do to my patient?"
No, not too often, at least. I feel like I was always the person who was pushing people really hard anyway, so I don't really know if honestly it's changed that much of how hard I'm pushing people. I think that's more for me because I've always been the therapist who pushed people pretty hard to begin with, because I kind of always thought I was just meeting their body where it was at. And if it tells me it can give more, we're going for more. Honestly, I don't know if I'm actually doing more in way of intensity for my training sessions. It's probably just more focus on gait. I feel like the amount of work I make people do is almost about the same.
Gotcha.
As you well remember, Bill, how hard I work.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I do remember one day I had like a 15-minute session, 15-minute break between PT and OT, and I was like, instead of going back to the room, how about I just lay down here on the mat table and take a nap?
And I think we're like, all right.
Yeah, that was pretty much the way that went.
Sure, why not?
So obviously you're working on in an inpatient context for
Yes.
folks who are just sort of out of the neuro floor. They're still in that first 30 days generally, obviously not always. But is this a model that is also applicable to patients who may be more in the chronic phase on an outpatient basis, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the road? Or is it really just focused on just that newer patient, either because where they are in the recovery or because of the nature of inpatient rehab?
Actually, the initial study was done on chronic patients, people that were between 6 months to 2 years post-stroke. And then they took this information and did later studies about moving it into a acute rehab situation. So no, absolutely. This is something that can definitely be done on an outpatient basis. It really should be done on an outpatient basis, honestly, because this is where PT for stroke recovery is moving, is this high intensity gait training. That this is where we're showing the best and greatest recovery for patients. So no, absolutely. This is for all levels of stroke care.
So somebody who is getting back into outpatient care, maybe they haven't been in there for a while or they're still in there, should definitely consider asking their PT about this methodology if their goal is to improve their walking.
Absolutely. Yes. This is very, very new to clinical practice. So how I got to knowing about it was the American, the APTA, the American Physical Therapy Association, has a branch called the Academy of Neurological Physical Therapy. And that's where I got my board certification through. And they came out with a new clinical practice guideline at the beginning of 2020. Stating that this high intensity gait training, this locomotor recovery is what we should be doing. And they also started a national campaign called Intensity Matters. There's even this super cute little picture with like a heart and a brain holding hands, because that's where we want to go, is making that heart and brain work together even more, which is super awesome. And I heard about this, and at first I was like, what the heck is this? Like, what are we doing? So I decided to take actually a very long course with George Hornby. It's been online because COVID. It's been really interesting. And I didn't quite understand it at first. Like, I didn't feel comfortable in enacting this until I kind of looked into it more, figured it out. So I would say this is something definitely to bring up with your outpatient physical therapist, but understand that they might not 100% know what's going on with this, because it is so new in terms of like a guideline that we should be moving towards. That doesn't mean they shouldn't do it though.
and hey, it gives them something that they can pursue for their next continuing education credit.
Exactly. So no, absolutely. You might be introducing something to them. Not that I hope that my colleagues will be staying up on current literature and current all of that. But as we know with anything, if it's brand new, it's brand new. So sometimes it just means that they're going to need a little minute to look it up and figure it out. But absolutely bring this up. This is something that should be going on.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing, too, is that we often talk about how siloed the medical field can be. Even within physical therapy, neuro branch is going to be different from, say, PTs who are focused on sports injury. So if your PT is not specialized in neuro recovery, they might not have encountered this as much.
That is so true. While we all receive degrees as generalists in physical therapy, that's not the path we all take. Typically, people start specializing fairly early on. Like, you have an idea of what you want to do and kind of get into that area, and then you learn more and more and more. Like, it's a constant learning process in the realms of orthopedics, neurology, pediatrics, all of that. So especially if you're going to like a traditional outpatient clinic, they're going to be more orthopedic based in nature. So they're probably super up to date on things I have no idea about, for like knee replacements and shoulder injuries and things like that. That I'm like, cool, I'd have to look that up too. But they'd have the same thing with neuro. Well, that's my area of expertise, and that's where I see more of my patients. they would need to look things up as well. And that's okay. Learning is good, no matter where you're at in this whole thing.
Absolutely. And as a survivor, you are the expert on what's going on with yourself to be able to share that information. And you're going to be the primary coordinator of care among different specialties. I've certainly educated my GP about stroke care and other things like that. Just because they, the medical professionals are very good at what they do, which can be kind of a narrow field sometimes, because that's how you get very good at what you do.
Yes. I would have absolutely no idea how to rehab a shoulder anymore, to be completely honest. But I used to do that, but it's been a long time. But I'm your go-to girl for a stroke. So yeah. But I agree. Absolutely.
So how did you get into PT to begin with back in those days? What was it about this field that really drew you to it?
I actually spent a lot of time in physical therapy myself. I was a very active kid. I was a multi-sport athlete, sport of season, and I was a ballet and jazz dancer on top of that. And I really hurt my knee when I was in 8th grade, very badly. Ended up finding out that I sprained everything possible in there and tore my meniscus. And
Yikes.
Yeah, it was nasty. So spent about 6 months in therapy, didn't get better, had to go to surgery, spent another 3 months in physical therapy. And my physical therapist was also my basketball coach. So I kind of knew him and stuff like that. He was pretty great. And I found that physical therapy really seemed to put together all the pieces of things that I loved. I love science, especially anything biological based, anatomy based, all of that. I like being active. I don't like to sit down and just sit in front of a computer. That's not really me. And I like talking to people. I'm a very social person and I enjoy that time. And I'd found that while medicine really intrigued me, I felt like doctors your traditional MDs did not spend that much time with their patients, honestly, that it was more like a quick check-in and a lot of management beyond that. Or a surgeon is, the person's under. They don't really talk to their patient. They're in there doing their work, which is great, but not kind of what really spoke to me as a person. So I started volunteering in physical therapy and really loved it. And I thought where I was going to go with this whole thing was I was going to be a physical therapy for kids like myself who got hurt, who are injured in sports. I had no interest in doing the professional sports realm, but I really wanted to do people who were like me, that sports injury. But what made me change my mind was when I was in college and right before I was about to go to physical therapy school, my dad's cousin fell off a roof when he was putting up Christmas decorations and it sustained a traumatic brain injury and spent months at Harborview, initially in the ICU in a medically sustained coma, and then afterwards in rehab. And it really felt to me like the physical and occupational therapists were the people who helped us the most as the family. They spent time with us. They told us what was going on. They kept us involved in the patient's care, all of that. And I found that so much more rewarding. And I felt like that was an area that I could bring a lot to. So went to PT school, loved every bit of learning there, honestly. And then did not go into neuro right away because when I graduated from physical therapy school, all the hospitals in the Seattle area were unfortunately going through a huge transition. So I did outpatient orthopedics for a while. So I went back to treating those kids that were getting sports injuries, which was wonderful and great, but it just wasn't as fulfilling as what I had done in my clinical practice in school, which was I worked with spinal cord injury patients a lot. And I really wanted to get back to neuro. And my path eventually got me to where I am now, working in a rehab unit in a hospital in Seattle, Washington. And our hospital happens to be a national stroke center. So I started doing more stroke training instead of spinal cord. And it's just been so awesome and rewarding. And there's so much research coming out from the stroke areas. And I'm learning so much, and I feel like it's constantly challenging me because no one's stroke is exactly the same. And the brain is so interesting and vivacious, and nobody's stroke is the same. And then there's different ways you can have strokes. And so I'm never doing the same thing with each patient.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with when we talk about one of the key differences then between orthopedics and neuro is that when it comes to stroke related stuff, I know there is literally nothing wrong with my leg. There's literally nothing wrong with my hand. The problem is literally all in my head. And that's just the opposite of orthopedics.
Exactly. Orthopedics, there's something wrong with your joint. There's something wrong with your muscle. Let's fix this. And neuro is all what's going on in your brain that's not allowing you to do what you want to do. And let's try to get those things rewired again. So in a way, I'm kind of an electrician, I guess, because I focus on rewiring all the time.
Sure. Absolutely. And that's a great perspective on that. I also think it's great that when you first got out, you had to go back into orthopedics, because that is a great way to do that check. You get to then leave that with no regrets about maybe I should have pursued this to begin with.
Yes, agree completely. And that's the beauty about physical therapy school too, is you come out as a generalist. You can do whatever almost. There are exceptions because you need extra training for certain things. And you can take the path least traveled. And honestly, if I decide down the road that I'm no longer fulfilled by neurology, I don't see that happening. I can go back to orthopedics. I'll need to spend a lot of time learning then, which isn't a bad thing. But that is the cool thing about it, is the ability to switch around. But currently, I don't see myself with that. There's so much to learn still in neuro. I want to just continue to be the best practitioner I can possible. And that there's so much more research coming out, if you ask me, in neuro, that the brain is the final frontier in our bodies. And it's so much is still unknown that there's just going to be continued research and big things coming out. And that's a terrible way to say it. I can't think of anything better.
No, I mean, that's a theme I hear a lot. It's a theme I hear a lot and see a lot in the new stuff that's coming out. And the more I hear, though, about what ballet dancers end up doing to their bodies, it's just frightening what that field does, what that practice does to folks. And those folks are tough.
I'm going to need new hips, new knees, new ankles, the whole dang bit. And I only danced into my teens and then gave up ballet completely in high school, and then only did jazz and modern through college. And I still going to be a mess.
Fortunately, you know some folks who are good with that stuff.
Yeah, I'm also just really hoping they can make cartilage by then. That is my goal and hope.
Yeah.
Yep.
So today then, what's your favorite thing about working in PT?
I think it's the relationships that I make and seeing people who I'm invested in get better, honestly. I love being the person that guides people on their beginning of their journey through their new disability and their new life, honestly, and being there through them, through the struggles through it. It's really rewarding seeing somebody come in who has all these goals and then help them accomplish them. And that relationship you make with people is just really rewarding.
You are one of the two women in my life who have taught me to walk. The other was my mother in the early 70s. So
yes. I hear that a lot. Or like, God, this was so much easier when I was a baby. It's like, well, yeah, but you don't remember it. It was probably really hard then too, by the way.
But the floor was a lot closer.
The floor was a whole lot closer, yes. Babies are meant to fall, adults aren't. So that's why we got to find ways to get you walking that are safe.
So what do you see that separates the your more successful patients from your less successful?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say two things. Buy into your physical therapy program. That knowing what you're doing is hard, and that the therapist knows what they're asking you to do is hard, but that we're challenging you effectively, and that trusting that we are to have your best interests in heart and your goals at heart, and that giving yourself that ability to like buy in and really go for it is the first thing. And the other thing is just also at the same time being kind to yourself. Like if your frustration is a totally normal thing, being upset, being sad, grieving, because it's a process and there's a grief process involved in the rehab process as well. You're grieving for your previous self because you're pretty much a whole new person when you go through this. And it absolutely is true. But you got to give yourself a little grace knowing that that's okay. Absolutely. And if you can give yourself that grace and know times are going to be tough and take the time when you need to really feel those feelings, you're going to be so much better in the long run.
Grace is a very important word to bear in mind and to think about.
Yes, it's a very important word to me. It's actually my daughter's middle name too, because I feel like that's we need to all give ourselves a little more grace in our life and a little more grace to ourselves about accepting who we are and where we are in our journey, no matter what's going on with any of us. We're all on a journey. Especially this year, because we're talking in December 2020, where it's sort of in the heart of the COVID stuff right now. Oh, God, yes.
And in addition, everything else in the year that, let's, we can sort of look back to January with misty eyes, nostalgic. Remember when our biggest worry was nuclear war between the U.S. and Iran? That was nice.
That seems funny now.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. And Australia was on fire for a while.
Exactly. Yeah. Because this year just started out fabulous to begin with.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, how is COVID, obviously COVID-19 is impacting stroke because, it's causing more stroke, especially among younger folks. But how is it impacting your PT sessions? What are you able to do or not do as a result of it?
Well, we're lucky enough that currently our unit is still open. At the beginning of COVID, we did have to shut down our unit because we did have a couple cases on it from patients, visitors bringing it to the patients themselves. So we had to completely shut down the unit, which was really very frustrating. And I did not experience it because I went on maternity leave right then because I was 37 weeks pregnant at the beginning of March when this all went down. And my boss, and I'm something about me, I'm a type 1 diabetic as well. So that's a part of me and a part of my practice and things like that. So sometimes I have to go get juice in the middle of my sessions with people and be like, sorry for a hot minute. So my boss and I,
Let's put you on the exercise bike for a while.
Yeah, I just had to go grab something. I'll be right back. Or you might see me check my pump or something like that. Yeah. So my boss and I made the decision back when I was, high risk for being pregnant and then high risk for being diabetic to put me on a little bit of early maternity leave. So I did not experience the first part of COVID as a practitioner, but rather as a new mother and being in the hospital myself in that situation. But I'm experiencing it now. We are lucky enough that the unit is not shut down right now. We are not allowing any visitors though. And that in of itself is really difficult. So the biggest thing for me, for my practice that has changed is obviously I'm not doing a lot of caregiver training. We're doing it over the phone or via Skype or Zoom when we need to. And that's very, very difficult, honestly. We are getting some special accommodations for patients that's just not a possibility for. But that's very difficult. I would say the biggest thing that affects me, not only as a physical therapist, but just as a person, is while I still touch people in return in a part of our sessions, like guiding their limb when we're walking or helping them stand with using the gait belt. I'm not supposed to give people hugs or shake their hand or anything like that. Like I have to be and I'm wearing gloves all the time, which was a new thing for me. I feel like human touch is a really important thing for all of us. And so right now, not only are my patients isolated from their families, they're not receiving like warm human touch. They're receiving human touch in terms of how to get from one place to another for a transfer, but that's it. And so finding that we're spending a lot more of my time being an emotional therapist as well as a physical therapist, and understanding that like that's okay and I'm okay with that. And knowing that maybe sometimes we're not going to get a lot done because somebody just needs to talk, and that is okay right now.
Those things you don't, think about until the world is suddenly different, and people are now having to deal with that isolation and stuff. So I'm just realizing now that means probably the Starbucks in the lobby at Swedish is probably closed too, isn't it?
It is not, because that would make all of the practitioners super upset. So it's pretty much only open for all of us who are there treating people,
Right.
because there's still a lot of people in the hospital, between doctors, nurses, people making the hospital run, administrators. And then because we all do have so many outpatient clinics that are open, there are patients who are coming through. They're open for limited hours, not like they used to be, but oh my God, they were closed for a while, and it was like the worst thing in the world. I know that's really stupid, but when you are in the hospital and you need coffee and there is no coffee and they can't have coffee on the floors anymore, like they can't brew coffee. I know. So, that all your coffee options are gone.
Oh, that is I remember the neurointerventionist I saw on the acute floor. He came to me and on like the first day I was in there and said, "Well, this is Seattle, so I'm not going to take away all your coffee. But you probably need to stop with the 5-shot beverages."
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll tell you, the highlight of my day, outside of course my PT sessions with you when I was inpatient, was always when my girlfriend was able to wheel me down to the Starbucks down there. We'd get some coffee and just go sit out there in the parking circle for an hour or two and just sort of watch what was going on around us. And that was such an important part of the day and such an important part of my recovery to reset and rethink. And that obviously now is very, very different in this environment. And also because it's December in Seattle now.
Yeah, but that didn't mean people weren't doing that before COVID anyways. We encouraged it still. They maybe just sat inside and looked out the window instead of being outside the whole time. But no, it's all of those things that make rehab so much more doable and emotionally less challenging, we can't have the dining room open. So patients aren't eating together. So they're not sharing their experiences with each other. They don't really get that communication, that camaraderie that we usually get. They can only eat in their rooms. They can't leave their rooms unless they're in therapy. Every little part that's like social that exists in rehab is just gone right now. And it's so frustrating for the patients, for the therapists, because we all know that those are such an important part of like reconnecting with yourself and keeping yourself sane during this process. And our patients who are in therapy for 4 to 6 weeks, because if they're the more severely impaired patients, it's just a really long time. We just got approval to start taking patients outside in the realm of therapy. And it's not even supposed to be like, let's just go outside. It has to have like a purpose behind it. But gosh, when I can, people's eyes just light up, honestly. And I get it. That time outside, that time away, that time to feel like a more normal person is so helpful and so important.
Yeah, that really is, and that makes such difference when you can safely do that. So please, everybody, just mask up. We're not asking. It's not too much. Just go ahead and put on your mask when you're out there or going any place. And if you're not going to stay home, mask up. It's not that hard.
Absolutely. It is really not that hard. I hate masks. I hate them. I will be the first person to say how much I hate them. I have hated them for years. They're hot. They're sweaty. They make your glasses fog up as someone who wears glasses. But they're so important. They're so important. There's a reason that we wear them. And no, your oxygen will not fall. Otherwise, surgeons would be dead by now. And I'm pretty sure people who make their money in medicine aren't going to put their brains at risk. And yeah, it's a simple thing you can do to help so many people. And honestly, if this all comes out to being a big joke, whatever, which it's not, by the way, I'm not saying it is, wouldn't you rather say that you were the person who tried to help people compared to were selfish and just decided to only take care of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The mask, you don't know if you're infected. That's the thing with this. You just don't know. I have no reason to think I am infected. Doesn't mean I'm not.
Absolutely. Yeah. As being a type 1 diabetic, my boss and I made the decision that I don't personally treat the patients with active COVID, but I'm on units that they exist all the time. So there's nobody on the rehab unit that you have to have a negative COVID test. We do check people very quickly if they do have any symptoms. Visitors aren't allowed, so the possibility of them having it is very little. But I do go to other floors. I work at least once every other week in the neuro ICU or the neurotelemetry unit, and I enjoy that time. I used to work in an ICU all the time, so it's nice to continue that practice and continue my skills in that area. And there are always people on the floor with COVID, so that doesn't mean that I'm not around it. I'm not physically in the room with somebody, but so I just assume I have it all the time. So we don't see my grandparents. We don't see anybody that I could possibly hurt, because that would kill me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that brings us to our hack of the week.
If there's something that you used to do that gave you joy when you before your disability, there are so many resources out there to figure out how to do that again. If you're a painter, they actually make support systems for your wrist and your hand that can help you move, as well as bigger brushes. If you were a cyclist, they have adaptive cycling things and recumbent cycles and all of that. And you'd be surprised how many resources there are in your communities for those things. And that physical therapists are really good at finding those things for you. If you have an interest, we'll find it. Ask us questions. We want to be asked questions. It may be different, doing things that you enjoy, but that doesn't mean they're completely inaccessible to you. We can look into it, and just generally our knowledge base of like how motion works, how your disability, where your weaknesses and strengths lie. Like, is this appropriate for you? Is it not? Use us. Like, I give patients my email even after they leave, because I don't mind if people continue to ask me questions, or, hey, I saw this. Do you mind giving me a minute to check it out? I don't mind at all. Like, that's great. I want to be a resource for people. So don't forget that your therapists are there for you beyond just your session, that if you have questions, you have concerns, you can always reach out to us, and we're always there to help.
And generally, the other thing from in my conversations with various therapists, they love it when you reach out afterwards, because most of the therapists, especially inpatient, they see you at the very beginning when you're at your weakest, and love seeing where you've come 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the road.
Oh, so true. I love it when people come back in non-COVID times, come back and visit and say hi, and I get to see where they are in their movement. And there's been so many times where I don't at first recognize the person, because they're just doing so amazing. And it's just so rewarding to see, because yeah, we're at the starting line. Like when you're in rehab, you're at that starting line, and when you leave, you're still at the very beginning of the race. So you're the where you go from there is a big mystery to us if you don't check in. we do sometimes wonder.
Oh, that is fantastic. So Meghan, if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Be happy to reach out to me through LinkedIn, which I have added my resource on Bill's website as well.
Well, Meghan, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. This has been an absolute delight. I love catching.
I know, it's been wonderful. Now that you're in Ballard, we'll have to do more when COVID's over.
One thing to take away from this conversation, well, actually, I guess one of many, is to cherish the relationships that you have with your therapists, if of course you liked them. You see, with my PTs and OTs, I would spend an hour and a half each day working closely with them in, some very sensitive contexts. As a patient, you form a bond with your therapists and inpatient in a way that you just don't with your doctors, who you might see your doctor 5, 10, 15 minutes a day. And it's okay to sort of acknowledge and respect that relationship. If you're no longer under your therapist's care, you can still reach out to them. Go ahead and send them a note or an email or a video message and just let them know how you're doing. If you don't have their contact info, you can likely reach out to the facility that treated you, and maybe they have an email address published. Or if not, you can always call the therapy department and ask how to get a message to a therapist. odds are you have made quite a bit of progress since you were discharged. And they would love to see and to know that. I mean, we typically get discharged from inpatient therapy when we can safely, survive. But after time, you can sort of start to thrive, figure out your new normal, and really make a lot of progress in living the life you want to live. Probably not all the way there, maybe not all the way there, but any progress is going to be significant relative to where you were inpatient. And your therapists would love to see that. Of course, make sure you respect their boundaries. Some may be happy to connect with social media, others may not. And seriously, especially dudes, don't be creepy. Just don't. Don't assume that a great clinical relationship automatically means a great friend relationship either. Think about it as a professional relationship first, because, that's what it is, and that's how it starts. And keep that context in mind. Setting aside the complexity of interpersonal relationships amid shifting professional contexts in relation to brain injury, it's also great to see the research continuing in how to help people walk better. Because even though the way people walk hasn't significantly changed in, centuries, well, actually, I should probably double check that. Who knows? Maybe modern life has shifted the way we walk, the gait length, and all sorts of other things as we typically walk less and drive more or sit still in pandemic. But regardless, the fundamentals of walking haven't changed in a very long time. It's also a reminder that the work Meghan and her colleagues in NeuroPT are doing isn't about the leg or the knee or the hip or the foot. It's about the brain. Building new and better connections among the wires that make up the tissue of our nervous system to get around that chunk of dead tissue that's in our brain now. The repetition of walking and the stress on the heart from the intensity makes a difference in how well we learn that skill, how well our brain is able to rewire to acquire those skills. And that difference actually shows up when we measure walking performance. So it's great to see that continuing. In some unrelated news, I did also recently appear on the Caffeinated Comics podcast. Caffeinated Comics is generally a nerdy or geeky show about everything from pop culture to comics to just all sorts of things in that era. And it, of course, is hosted by my good buddy, John Clark. And we were on there to talk about, well, we spent a big chunk of time talking about the recent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and the politics around that. But of course, we also talked a lot about Star Trek because that's what we do. And we couldn't talk too much about Doctor Who because I am way behind on the Jodie Whittaker stories. We also talked a little bit about Tom Kane. Tom is a voice actor on lots of animated shows. You may know him from the animated Star Wars series or from the Powerpuff Girls, where he's the voice of Professor Utonium. And he has done just a ton of voiceover work. Unfortunately, Tom recently joined our club here. He had a stroke, and he is now dealing with aphasia, which must be extra brutal for a professional voiceover performer. So I wish Tom well and a speedy recovery. You can find links to some of the news about Tom, as well as links to my appearance on Caffeinated Comics in today's show notes over at strokecast.com/HIT. So head on over to the show notes for links to the studies around high-intensity gait training. You'll also find links to Meghan's LinkedIn page if you'd like to connect or learn more about her work. And the key link to remember is to just head on over to strokecast.com/HIT. Another thing to consider is, does your physical therapist or physiotherapist or another stroke survivor that you happen to know want to learn more about high-intensity gait training? Go ahead and tell them to listen to this episode also at strokecast.com/HIT. Take a moment today and let the therapist you've worked with in the past know how you're doing today. I'm sure they would love to hear it. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.